In this episode, we're bringing together faculty and administrators from across the university for a lively interdisciplinary panel discussion on some of today's pressing topics. Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Today we're hosting a panel discussion. Joining me is Dr. Jennifer Gibbs, Associate Professor of Communication for the School of Communication and Information. Lisa Smith, Coordinator for Domestic Violence Services for the Office of Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance. And finally, Dr. Joe Sanchez, Assistant Professor for the Department of Library and Information Services. All of them work here at the Rutgers New Brunswick campus. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Today's topic, as we've all kind of talked a little bit before, is social media and bullying. In fact, over the past year, there have been some high-profile kind of cases from Massachusetts to Arkansas to California and all around, a lot of different places around social media and bullying. So I think let's start with some working definitions first. What's bullying, and how does bullying show up on a social media site or a social media context?
Well,
as the chance to jump in.
I'll start. Bullying, I think, is general aggression towards someone else, intimidation, harassment, and if we're talking about cyberbullying, I would say that it's very similar and probably rooted in offline bullying behavior, but it's using technology to harass or intimidate someone else.
Okay.
I think one of the key distinctions between the face-to-face bullying and the online bullying is when you're online bullying, you're broadcasting. So it's not just to 2 or 3 people in your office if you're playing an office prank, or to a couple of people in your high school. Now you're broadcasting out to everyone in the world where anyone can access what happened and can repeat it and repost and relink, and those types of connections make it a lot bigger of an issue. It becomes a broadcast out to everybody, and there's an online archive where people can come back and see it, and the issue doesn't necessarily go away after a couple of months or maybe a year. It's always online.
I think also what people have been talking about in cyberbullying is that in the old days, if you were bullied at school at 3 o'clock, it stopped because you went home. But now with happening through social media or happening online is that it can be 24/7, so it can be relentless. It can be just this on and on and on. So that, I think, just to add.
Yeah, and if I could add, I agree with those factors. I think that those things magnify it in a lot of ways. And another characteristic of online context that's different is the anonymity involved, and that there's greater anonymity. It may lead to more uninhibited communication. People may feel, may say harsher things than they would to someone's face, and so that may result in more hurtful comments. And also on the flip side, bullying may be anonymous. You may not know who it is that's bullying you, and that can make it even harder to stop the problem and figure out who's doing it.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because the conversation around face-to-face conversation, because one of the things you had said before was, and I think Lisa agreed, it was the face-to-face stuff. You at least know who your attacker is, or who your bully or antagonizer is. On a social media site, it may be connected to a name you don't understand. It may be connected to no name. There's a case right now where Facebook has a case where 2 students had put up a whole entire Facebook page dedicated to bullying one student, and they couldn't trace it back to who the name was in terms of how it happened, so they had to go back and do a whole bunch of different things. So there doesn't seem to be the connection to a person, a face, a kind of individual in some ways, so that makes it a little difficult to follow in some ways.
I agree, yeah. I think, although to counter that, I did read a statistic that with teenagers and high school students, about 80% of them know the bully.
Okay.
So I think that there is a lot of peer-based bullying that goes on, but there is that wrinkle of misrepresentation. You may get a text or an IM or a Facebook comment from a name that you know, but it may not be that person. It may be their friends or someone else misrepresenting them. So I think that it is definitely more complicated. It may be a name you don't know, or it may be a name you do know, but it's not that person. Someone else is misrepresenting themselves. So.
I don't know if this is the same. If we would say this is the same as bullying, but I know there was something actually now with college students where I guess at least a case in Florida where a sorority sister somebody was posing as another sorority sister and
another
to get
Facebook
information about them, and then we're using this information and in unsavory ways, and so they could also, because I think part of in the cyber world, there's not responsibility, so people say outrageous things because they can just because they can, but then there's also posing as somebody else and trying to get information from them and doing fraud in that sense.
The case that Lisa's talking about really swept part of the Southeast and part of the Northeast. There were women who were first-year associates within a sorority, and somebody had found out, and they were kind of having a conversation with them, and then would lead to more harassment online. And it really had happened in more than one state. It really had taken off, and it didn't happen until there was media coverage with the one woman who chose to come forward. And then as soon as that happened, there was a flood of conversations around Facebook and kind of what was happening with other sorority women around the United States. So, Joe, we often look at one type of social media. We look at Facebook. Can you kind of give us a working definition or some different places where social media show up in a way that makes sense to us?
Sure. I think there's, we can look at social media as far as Twitter, we can look at Facebook, we can look at Flickr. Other areas that I study are virtual worlds, such as World of Warcraft or Second Life. And we do see bullying inside of Second Life and inside of World of Warcraft. A lot of times we call those griefers. So we use the word griefer instead of games. Griefers are people that are basically cyber bullies inside of a game. And they may do things in Second Life where they'll send constant instant messages to an avatar. They may show up at different online events and strike or picket at the events. And it formalizes itself in very different ways. But in the heart of it's bullying. It comes down to bullying. It comes down to people not being civil towards each other and not respecting each other's point of views or opinions.
So Lisa, from your perspective in the work that you do, how would you, does bullying happen just when you're in school, or can bullying happen your whole entire life from, beginning at school, going to career?
Well, we have talked about it in terms of why bullying happens, and so if it is focused on somebody who's different, then my guess is that might follow them their whole life, whatever their difference might be, whether it's gender, whether it's assumed orientation, whether it's, we were talking earlier about race or ethnicity, something like that. Bullies, I think, like batterers, can be very persistent, and I'm not sure that there is a particular rhyme or reason in terms of why they might stop. When I was bullied in middle school, I don't really remember what ended it, because I didn't say anything to anybody, and so as far as I know, the student wasn't challenged in any kind of way. So, so I'm not sure. I think that it certainly could be something that could follow them.
Lisa, you brought up an interesting comment earlier about bullying with adults. Bullying with adults was harassment versus killed kids, which was bullying. Can you talk about that a little bit again?
Well, we've been, a colleague of mine and I have been asked to do training for health services in January on bullying. And so, but bullying in the college or university context. And so when we've been looking at some of the websites or whatever, they're all for high school, middle school, younger, and there's not so much in the university realm, except this case in Florida that kind of spun around recently. And so we were thinking about, okay, what does it happen when bullying goes to college? What does that look like? And so I think we look at things like harassment or hate crimes or something that it's not really called bullying, but that same kind of behavior will happen. We talked with some students and said, well, what does bullying look like in a campus? And all of them were just sort of not knowing how to respond because they thought bullying more attributed to high school or to younger. So I think the language, as we use, changes in terms of when we get older. We don't look at it as bullying. As an adult, for example, that we probably, I'm sure, have people that are being bullied, but yet we wouldn't call it that. They're being harassed, or the person's being mean to them, or something.
Well, which brings me to my conversation, because there seems to be one of the things that I'm sure we all heard when we were in school: just get over it. People will grow out of it. They'll do it. And so this idea of bullying, in some ways, is handled very differently with this generation than I think past generations. What do you think accounted for some of that change? I mean, I think
what I thought about actually when you were just starting to say that was I read on one's website how, in the old days, former days, it was, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And we're really finding out that is, of course, absolutely not true. That there can be lots of adverse reaction to that. I'm sure we've looked at that. Is that that we look at in terms of symptoms even as similar to post-traumatic stress disorder that can follow people around if they're being bullied or harassed in some kind of way, so that we know that those words can be have a great impact on people.
Right. I think a lot of it is that students nowadays or kids nowadays have grown up with social media. They've grown up participating in online networks. They've grown up chatting. They've grown up even with virtual worlds and games. And communicating in those areas comes naturally to them. It doesn't seem absurd to post something publicly. They don't think beyond, or I would say a lot of them don't think beyond, only my friends are going to see this. And when they participate in these types of things, they're not realizing the scale when they bully somebody or when they make comments towards somebody else. And I think at those times it can get out of hand. So I think part of it is trying to make students aware of these things. Everybody can see this, and it's not just a small group of people.
One of the things I want to go back to what Lisa said, and anybody can chime in, is the interesting kind of conversation from what is bullying to harassment. One of the things at a university, and one of the things we do with the harassment law, is the ability that it's not about the intention of the harasser, it's the perceived intention from the person being harassed. And somehow in the bullying conversation, we seem to have taken part of that away. What does the person feel like? And not going back to what was the intended conversation. And a lot of what's been focused on in the media over the past few months has been, what did this person potentially feel? Why did they take their life? What was going on? And so we're doing a lot more, we're doing a paradigm shift in some ways. And I'm not so sure if the mass media outside of CNN or BC, or broadcast news covers that very well. I don't see it on mainstream NBC, CBS. Thoughts about that from you, Jen?
Yeah, I have several thoughts about that. I think it is sort of problematic trying to talk about bullying and how it gets talked about for several reasons. I think one is kind of trying to pin down what behaviors we're talking about. What's harassment, what's bullying, and it can be a lot of different things. And then also from the victim's perspective, we don't hear as much about their perceptions, and a lot of times it's after the fact, and we're trying to attribute that. I did read some literature on bullying in the workplace, and it was trying to take more of a perspective of the victim, and it was saying, we tend to think of the bully as having all of the power and the victim as having no power. And I think that bullying certainly does involve a power imbalance, but I don't think there's really been enough attention on the victim and ways that they may resist or ways that they may have power in the situation to cope with it. We just think of someone as either a bully or not a bully. And actually a lot of the times, victims may retaliate and bully back or cyberbully back. And so it's not always kind of a clear-cut distinction that either you're a bully or you're not, or you're a victim, and I think that we need to kind of complicate our discussion of this a little bit more in order to see the relationship that's going on.
That's a great place for us to take a break. I'll come back, and I think I'll probably dive into that a little bit more.
Okay.
We're going to be right back. So. So we're back with Dr. Jennifer Gibbs, Associate Professor of Communications for the School of Communications and Information, Lisa Smith, Coordinator of Domestic Violence Services for the Office of Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance, and again, Dr. Joe Sanchez, Assistant Professor for the Department of Library and Information Sciences, and again, they all work here at Rutgers, New Brunswick. We started the conversation around cyberbullying and the conversation about what is bullying, what is social media. And before we left break, Jennifer had gotten into the conversation about it's a little bit more complex in some ways. The conversation about identifying the bully and identifying potentially sometimes a victim and how they're responding back in some of those ways. So let's contextualize it to a classroom. So does bullying happen in a classroom from a faculty perspective? How does the issue of free speech play into that? I mean, especially around two faculty members. There seems to be the perception that the faculty has the power in the classroom, and the faculty has free speech and the idea of academic freedom. And is there the ability to take advantage of that in bullying people in a classroom?
From the faculty's perspective?
Faculty, student perspective, however you want to be able to take that.
Well, I think that it's a tricky issue because I think there is freedom of speech on one hand, and knowing where to draw the line and what constitutes bullying. I think that it's certainly possible to abuse power, you know, in any situation in the classroom or in the workplace or any other situation where you have an imbalance of power. And I guess in terms of drawing the line, I would say maybe if it's hurting someone else, if it's having a hurtful outcome, if it's, you know, resulting in an unfair, you know, practice of grading or, you know, something like that. So that's what I would
I'd say we absolutely take risk as faculty when we leave the lecture and go into class discussions on topics, because a lot of times students can come out with some of their opinions that aren't necessarily mainstream and that are hurtful to other people. Lisa and I were talking earlier, had similar experiences about discussing gender in the classroom at times, where a lot of times male students will just kind of nod and say, no, it's not like that. Those issues don't happen. Those things don't happen to me. While the women are nodding along saying, yes, those things are true. They do happen. And I think a lot of time the power falls in the hands of the faculty of being able to hold the discussion in order to gain respect and to hold respect amongst students and to kind of keep the dialogue moving forward rather than backwards or falling into he said, she said, or you know, I was raised this way, so I'm right. And a lot of that comes down to different pedagogical techniques, I think.
So how do, I guess a larger question is, so how do we as a university have responsibility? Do we have responsibility or not responsibility in terms of interrupting bullying behavior and kind of identifying that behavior, whether it be from a phone call, a colleague, or seeing it and somehow play out in the classroom?
What I was thinking as we're talking was also an issue maybe of semantics, is that we do have, of course, policies and procedures and laws about something like sexual harassment from a professor who creates a hostile environment for, I was just thinking as you were talking about if they hurt, you know, if they had, you know, hurting another person. And so, and, you know, in those situations, I think, of course, the university has absolutely responsibility about that. I was also thinking while Joe was talking that there's also a difference between students wanting to try and ask a tough question and say, you know, I've never really understood that, so let me just ask. I'm not sure how to ask this in a correct sort of way. And so they're searching for information as opposed to saying hurtful, hateful things that sometimes when you have, we want to try and maintain an environment where people can ask questions, that's one thing, but you don't want to give people permission just to be oppressive. So I think there is, you know, that balance to try and set.
Absolutely.
So let's go back. I'm going to focus back because I think they're important topics. Do we have a social responsibility as an institution to teach our folks about the bullying behavior and identifying those in some ways?
Absolutely. I think that can happen in a couple of ways. I mean, one is through having specific anti-bullying policies, you know, at the university. So if incidents happen, there is punishment or there is recourse for that. But I think also it involves maybe trying to foster a broader climate of tolerance and civility. I really applaud the Project Civility that Rutgers is undertaking right now. And I think that, you know, a lot of these issues are sort of cultural and societal and, you know, what's sort of tolerated, you know, within the university community, what are the norms? And I think that a lot of students and, you know, faculty members and others sort of take their cue from the norms that exist in the community and act accordingly. And so I think that you know, that's definitely important.
And I agree with that. I think part of it can be messages we send during orientation for students when they come to campus. Maybe additional training or an emphasis on it for dorm residents or dorm advisors. Right. So that if something gets reported to you, a student saying, I'm being picked on in Facebook, not to roll your eyes at it and say, well, it's just Facebook. To understand that those things are serious. And to look into that and just listen.
We've talked a lot about the student. I'm going to change it to the faculty perspective. Tenure is, the tenure process is challenging. For anyone who has gone through that.
I just went through that last year. Yes, I agree.
So it really is an overview in terms of a critical kind of perspective of your scholarship work. And a lot of that can be, on occasion, construed as bullying based upon whether a faculty member within a department agrees with your approach to your scholarship. So in situations that academia is set up and the tenure process, is there an appropriate place for us to have the conversation around bullying, or is an assistant professor left to remain quiet so that their potential tenure case won't come to bear? Yes, I asked a difficult question.
So are you asking like what can untenured faculty do?
Well, is it a real issue? Is it just one of those myths that kind of just sits with assistant professors? I mean, I don't really, you know, as an administrator, we hear lots of things, and I think Lisa can agree with that one.
I would feel, let's say in our department, Jen and I are in the same department, that we have a nice mentoring system where we're pretty aware of what the tenure process is going to be like. And it's a pretty open environment as far as being able to ask questions and see what the standards are. Although I'm my second year in, so everything's rosy and peachy.
No, I think you know, collegiality is a really important you know, criterion in academia, and that can determine getting promoted and such. And so I think in that way there are sort of pressures for departments to be somewhat collegial. Now, and I feel like, you know, Joe and I are very lucky that we do have such a supportive school, and I haven't encountered any, you know, issues with bullying in that respect, although I have heard stories of other faculty members who, you know, maybe didn't get along with someone in their department who in a senior position who then, you know, was instrumental in them getting denied tenure. And I know the university has grievance processes. You can, and I've heard of several cases of people filing a grievance and then eventually it was overturned. So I feel like there should be a, you know, a system in place to kind of overrule one individual bully. But I think that also it's important for you know, junior faculty members to think about issues of fit and collegiality when they're choosing a department in the first place. I think it's really important to find colleagues that you get along with and that you know, that value you and appreciate your work, and also to kind of maybe form alliances with other senior members and, you know, kind of think of ways to be more active and not be put in a victim type role.
Let's go back to social media first perspective. I'm curious to find out who has liability and who has responsibility to interrupt bullying behavior on a social media site. We're going to use Arkansas. I think I can give you the best example. Arkansas, a small town in Arkansas, the vice president of the Board of Education, school board, basically came out and said during a day in remembrance on Facebook that he wasn't going to support lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender folks, that they were evil. He didn't want his kids to be bisexual or transgender in any way in terms of anything other than heterosexual, was fairly open about his non-open stance with regards to including folks who were different than him. And as the vice president for a school board, there were some issues about that. And so Facebook didn't step in and interrupt it. In fact, the folks who interrupted it were the media, and specifically the Southern Poverty Law Center, because they had found it on Facebook. So what kind of responsibility does the social media provider have, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Foursquare, because there's been some issues with Foursquare in terms of where you're checking in?
It's an interesting case because I'm a big believer in freedom of speech. And in a sense, while Facebook didn't directly step in and tell him to take this stuff down, the media itself, it's the sole being that it's a social media, actually the media itself served to uncover it. Whereas before, if this man would have expressed these opinions back in in the 80s, no one else would have heard these opinions. It would have just been maybe a flyer passed around or would have occurred during a dinner conversation. But now that he's able to broadcast these opinions, the general public can come out and say those are not mainstream views. We don't appreciate the views, and that should change. So in a sense, a lot of times social media communities will kind of moderate themselves and mediate themselves. I think this could be an example of that.
Well, and I was going to say, the outcome of that really was the fact that the community had basically said he wasn't welcome in lots of different ways, and his family had to move away, and he had wound up choosing to step down from the school board, and the media had asked him lots of questions. He was sorry for the folks he had wound up hurting, but he wasn't sorry for his views. It was a very interesting kind of context in terms of how it played out.
I was wondering, though, to use a different example, I know of a situation where someone put up false Facebook pages on someone that I worked with and said a bunch of nasty stuff. And when the student contacted Facebook, they immediately responded, took down the pages, found out where they were coming from, et cetera. So I think there's a difference when Jen was talking earlier about things that are intended to hurt people. I don't know that this person was intending to hurt people by expressing his opinions, even though they obviously were hurtful to people. But so again, we get back to intention, what's, so in terms
Is
of...
it targeted at a specific individual versus
Right.
just a general
I'm just saying
comment?
about this community that I either like or don't like about it, and I may not agree, I may not like to hear it, I may, not want to view it on YouTube or something, but again, is that different from I'm targeting specific people to say, you're a bad person or, something,
Right.
So I think there's some differences, I would think, in terms of responsibility, because I'm not sure I would expect a social media to close that down, even though I might personally want them to. Because
I don't really think it's Facebook's job to be out there policing every comment that's posted everywhere and deciding whether it's okay or not. I mean, then we really tread the line of censorship. But I think it does. We do have to consider kind of these issues of, is it targeting, is it repeated behavior, is it a general unpopular opinion, and I think there are other mechanisms, like Joe said, it's in the mass media and the community that will hopefully also kind of regulate that type of hateful communication.
There are two major things that happened in the tri-state area recently. One was looking at bullying via social media via a vendor to his customer. It was a person who was allegedly harassing his clients after they had not been happy with the purchase of his eyeglasses online, and pretty much folks have now talked about stalking, coming to hurt them, and really putting things in writing about sexually abusing them and a whole bunch of other things. And there was also a few weeks ago, the reality of New Jersey passing a law that's anti-bullying, but not really defining what that is. So how do we reconcile that we have this behavior that clearly is not a student, but the bullying kind of information in New Jersey doesn't define what that is? How do we reconcile both of those? I think one's very specific in terms of behavior and intent. Don't write back about your disclosure, we're going to harass you. And the other one's a nice intention. But what do we do with that intention?
I think those are kind of different issues in some ways, but and maybe the responsibility is different. I mean, in terms of laws, I think that there's just a lot of, it is sort of opening up a can of worms trying to create legislation about anti-bullying and cyberbullying, because it is so hard to pin down and it can mean so many different things. And I've read a lot about the problems with the existing legislation, that it is vague or it may not really cover that much. And so I think it's important to have legislation like this, but we can't really count on that to do the job for us. I think we have to intervene at other levels as well. So. Somebody want the last word?
I think it's also something that evolves, because when we talk about, for example, violence against women, which the Roma deal with, is that we do have laws, and they evolved over time. And I remember working, for example, before there was a stalking law, and if I was sitting out in front of your house, there wasn't much you could do about it because it was a public street. But now we have a stalking law that says if it's behavior at a particular person, that a reasonable person would feel fear, then okay, this is something we can deal with. So I think, although the bullying law may not yet be what we want it to be, that it is also something that evolves, and it does say, because our laws and policies do say things about what we care about as a community. So maybe it was important to have that statement out there to say we care about this, but yet now we have to figure out how to make this really work. And I also think too, though, we can't just depend on laws. It's also, what we call for in terms of behavior.
All right, we need to wrap up. I keep on telling my ear, great conversation, but we need to go. So I want to thank each one of you very much. It was great to meet you. Jennifer, Joe, Lisa, thanks so much. For more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.